mouth is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Never Legends podcast, I have Robinson and Holy Cross linebacker Dan Adams, beating Dan for the first time. Dan, thanks for doing this.
Oh, thanks for having me, Julian. I've been following the podcast for a while, and it's been great. Like just catching up on all the old stories and seeing all the people you brought on, man. Like, kudos to you for everything you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And yeah, again, thanks for doing this, especially it's on your birthday. Happy birthday. If Dan Adams is 38, I must be really old.
Yeah, it's crazy, Julian. It flies by. I know you have kids yourself, and you just wake up one day and it's like, man, like where did the time go? It's
Yeah,
insane.
exactly.
But I'm sure that just accelerates as you get older.
Yeah, it does. The more independent your kids are, the faster the time goes.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. So when I did a little research for this interview, you were described in a few places as an undersized linebacker.
Yeah.
How big were you both at Robinson and also at Holy Cross?
Yeah, so I was definitely undersized, so I was 5'9", maybe 195 pounds, right? So I probably started the season probably at 205. And then as the season wore on, like I was probably around like 198, 199.
That's it, both high school and college, that weight?
Yeah, I was pretty, I was full grown in high school, right? I didn't grow when I was in college. And so I played Mike linebacker around 200 pounds at the Division I AA level.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was, yeah, I guess I was undersized, but I wasn't tiny either for that level.
For us lay people, Mike must be the middle linebacker. Is that right?
Yeah, so Mike in college terminology is just the middle linebacker.
Right.
So I just played middle linebacker in college.
Yeah, I've heard that term. There was a football strategy game where kids, Sam, I forgot what they called. I guess Sam
Will.
must have been a strong safety, but they had names for all the defensive players.
You'll hear it like with the college terminology, like Mike is middle, Will is usually the weak side linebacker, that's covering more ground. And I know you're a basketball guy, at Robinson. I did a little research on your career too, and it's great that you're stepping into this stuff, and you know a ton about people's backgrounds, which is really cool.
Yeah, I know a ton. So I didn't play very well, but at least I know about everybody else. So before we get to Robinson. So, I was thinking about my neighbor. I grew up on the corner of Portsmouth and Sideburn, and my neighbor was Tibby Elliott. So I grew up next to Tibby. Yeah, Tibby's kids probably were at the school. Tibby's involved. He was probably 5'10", 5'11". I'd say 175, 170, maybe 180 as a linebacker. So it was interesting. I know you're probably going to tell me things have changed since you stopped playing, but things are really different from when I played. So I did play football. I didn't play varsity, but I played freshman and JV.
Right.
And 175, 180 was good size back then. We had just gotten a weight room at Robinson. Weight training was not huge yet. So it is funny how, obviously, you weren't the tallest guy in the world, but it was size wise, you were on the big size from when I played.
Yeah, things change, right? Like I was definitely on the smaller side, going into college, right? I didn't get recruited by a ton of big schools. I decided, hey, like I want to be able to play right away. And so the FCS was the place to go. And at that time, like I could use that to my advantage, right? Like I could use the crown of my head to get underneath people. I could shoot my arms, right? And I could, tackle people with my face, and that's how we were taught, at that phase. And, at this point, I think I would be at a severe disadvantage, because then I would have to come in with my shoulder. I wouldn't be able to use, because I'm at a lower point of gravity, right? And so I can naturally come up underneath people. And if I put my face right underneath your chin strap, it gives me an advantage because I can use my hands. But things have kind of changed in that direction. And I think it would be a little bit tougher at this phase.
Yeah. When you said FCS, that's the college division. We used to call that 1AA. Is that correct?
Yeah. So now they call it's the FCS is 1AA, FBS is 1A. 1A and 1AA are the older connotations for the different divisions. So FCS, FBS, FCS, Division 2, Division 3. So Division 1, Division 1 AA, Division 2, Division 3. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I know you went to Holy Cross, I was going to try to find some players from Holy Cross who I recognize. So
Yeah.
the two names that came to mind were Raiders had two running backs in the 70s, Mark Van Egan and Marv Hubbard. Turns out
Yeah.
they went to Colgate, your rival. So it wasn't
Yeah.
even Holy Cross running backs.
Yeah, so I mean, Holy Cross had some absolute studs back in the 80s, right? Because they were a scholarship school competing against a lot of non-scholarship schools. So yeah, you had Gordy Lockbaum, right? Who's really well known. I mean, he was a Heisman candidate back in the day. They did a 30 for 30 on Gordy. Gordy was really cool because he played both ways. So he played both offense and defense.
I haven't heard that name in so many years, but he was a big name for a while.
Yeah, he was a big name. And I spent a lot of time with Gordy actually when I was in Worcester. He was a big supporter of the Holy Cross program, just a really good guy. But physically it's just really interesting, like, because there's a hierarchy in everything, right? And different people have different physical gifts. And Gordy, like, he could just run a marathon and not even train, right? Like, he could just go off his couch, run a marathon and be fine. So like, it's just funny how that works, because Gordy, like, he played both ways. He never really came off the field, and that wasn't a big thing for him, right? And nowadays, like, to think about somebody playing like both ways, all special teams, I mean, it's really like you can't even fathom that. Like Peppers at Michigan did a little bit, but it wasn't like he was never leaving the field. So it is interesting how it's changed. And Gil Finnerty, like Gil the Thrill, he played for the Saints. He was big in the 90s. He actually was a transfer from LSU to Holy Cross, so he came there and he rushed for like 500 yards in a game. I mean, they killed it. And so they were competing against like Boston College, back at that time, like Doug Flutie. And there's actually been a resurgence at Holy Cross. This year they're ranked 8th in the country at the FCS level, 1AA level. Obviously, the competition, I think, has changed a little bit, right? I mean, I think 1AA has become a little bit weaker. Even some of the larger 1A programs, they've become a little bit weaker than they were in the past at the pinnacle, which I think was around like 2000. I think people probably would have different ideas of, different perceptions of how that was. But if you look at like the youth programs and the feeder systems, participation was at its all-time high, in the 90s, So yeah, it's interesting how the sport has evolved. And man, like, I'm just at this stage, at 38, I'm just so thankful to have had those experiences, to draw from, in my own life,
Yeah, I don't think football is going to be the same. It only has a couple generations left as we know it. I mean, I think there's going to be some kind of football, and if we make the right decisions, we'll be able to save it. But I think in terms of having as many teams, as many players, I think it's going to be very difficult to maintain.
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember too, like, how football was created. And I think a lot of people forget that, right? The origin of football started, with Walter Camp in New England. And the whole idea was to build men, like, the wars that ended, and they needed something where they could, build good foundations in people, help kind of young people, build a path and build the foundations that would enable them to be industrious and, serve in different jobs, be good people, all those things, right? And the reality of it, life is not always safe, right? There's consequences for different things. You can't control everything. But that's also the juice, right? Like, there has to be some type of downside, some type of negative consequence, right? When you're going into something, or it's not really worth pursuing, there always has to be some type of difficulty, right? So I think football in itself is kind of going through this brand issue where, hey, like, people are getting injured. Is that satisfactory, moving forward? When I played, like, you had like kickoff every single time, you had the wedge, like, there was no targeting. You couldn't just run across the middle and not worry about consequences, and it's very different in how the sport is viewed now. I believe they look at skilled players more as assets, especially at the NFL level. I mean, even at the college level. And so they want to protect those players, but it also puts the defense at a disadvantage, which is hard.
Well, so. You once made a comment about kickers that you didn't treat them as normal field players, which makes sense. Yeah. Would you prefer the kicker to go back to the 50s when kickers one of your field players kicks the ball as well, like Lou Groza, you're probably too young to know who Lou Groza was, but you know, by the time I started watching football, it had just turned over to full-time kickers. That's like 1972. By then, every team had a kicker, but before that, oftentimes your wide receiver or whatever, you had a punter or kicker on your team. So anyway, what was the point you were making on about
Yeah.
kicking?
So, so the comment I made, and it kind of speaks to like the history, right? So I actually went to West Springfield to start before I transferred over to Robinson. And at West Springfield, I mean, people will laugh at this, especially former players, but former players know, I mean, kickers in college, like they're in their own practices, they're completely separate from the team. Not to say that they don't bring a valuable part to that team, but when it comes to high school, like when you're only a kicker, especially now, I mean, you want to play different positions, and so when I was at West Springfield, Coach Renner had fourth down sports, right? So fourth down sports was this huge thing. We had Jeremy Kapanos, who was one of the punters that went to punt at Penn State. Jeremy Kapanos was 6'3", 220 pounds, and he was a punter. And so I used to give him a hard time because I was like, man, like you're 6'3", 220. Like, why can't you run down on kickoff and make tackles, And at West Springfield, it was just a different culture, right? So they had separate practices. Like we had a female place kicker. It was like this big thing, like
Oh,
this
I
big
remember that.
do.
Yeah.
Because Coach Renner, his background was as a kicker at the NFL level, and then he ran Fourth Down Sports, which is a for-profit entity at West Springfield. So as an actual player, I kind of over time, like I grew a little bit resentful with that, with the whole kicker focus, because like, dude, like we're in high school, like we don't need to just specialize in kicking. Like there's so many more aspects to the game at the high school level where, you need to play both ways. Like you need to be able to win. And, we were just at that school, and I had a lot of unique experiences because, I grew up through the SYC program, and then I transferred over to the Braddock Road program when I was in middle school. So I had a lot of early experiences with Robinson players like Lake Braddock Robinson. And at that point, those feeder programs were the pinnacle. And that's where all these kids were that were the outliers, the Chase Anastasios, the Mike Emos, John Kinzer, Blake, like all the guys that I played with, Adam Fasnot, all those guys came from those feeder programs. And so, for me, I was used to that foundation. And, as a young person, like I always wanted to play for Coach Bendorf over at Robinson. But unfortunately, like I lived in the Springfield district. I lived over by Huntsman Square. So I was kind of in a different area. So, for me, it was like, man, like I just kind of felt like something was missing. And it was just like by serendipity that everything ended up working out the way it did.
So you grew up, I guess it's Saratoga, almost near Saratoga, right? Right there.
Yeah.
So is that where you grew up, where your family initially settled?
Yeah. So I grew up right around, I was right off the Fairfax County Parkway. We lived in a townhouse off Streamway. So not too far from Huntsman Square, not too far from South Run.
Oh, okay.
A pretty close distance to that. And I was in sixth grade, I moved to, where my parents currently live, which is a little bit closer to Huntsman Square and South Run. So yeah, so my family's still there, was raised there. Obviously I was at West Springfield until my junior year. And it was crazy because like, as a kid, I always wanted to play for Coach Bendorf, right? And I was like always a dream, like, oh, like be able to go play for, Coach Bendorf and, Mike Emo, like all these guys I play ball with. And I ended up, kind of serendipitously, I actually got kicked out of school at West Springfield for something I didn't do. Like I got into a fight at my own house. And so West Springfield, like before I went to like court and before all the information came out, like they actually expelled me. And so I was out of school for like a month. My parents like were super supportive. My dad was super supportive, like talking about early heroes, like my dad was definitely the hero and the influence with football. But we were able to present all the information, and what ended up happening is the school was like, uh-oh, like we're in a pretty bad bind here. I mean, I know you're a lawyer, Julian, so they were basically like, uh-oh, what can we do to make this right? And so we're like, all right, well, I want to go to Robinson, full time, and I want to be able to go to school there and play there and finish there. So I was put in Robinson in the interim, so I was out of school for a month. I got put into Robinson temporarily while I was going through the court process. And then once everything was sorted out. I was found not guilty, all those type of things, just complete self-defense. They were like, well, you can decide to go back to West Springfield or stay at Robinson. And I was like, well, I'm going to stay at Robinson. So it ended up working out perfect.
So that must have happened. Was that the spring of your sophomore year?
So yeah, so I played the junior season. It happened on Halloween of my junior year.
Oh, so
So
you started the junior season with West Springfield?
yeah, I played the full year. I missed the last game because the school made a decision kind of abruptly that, hey, like, this kid got beat up. You know, we don't want to, like, Dan could be a potential threat. We don't want to deal with any type of lawsuits with it. We're going to expel him. And, we're not going to wait for court or any of those things. So the last game, like, I wasn't able to play, and I basically just sat out all of November. I wasn't in school, and then I ended up enrolling in Robinson temporarily. And then that's when I made the full transition, after it was done.
So, going back a little bit into your when you're starting out in football, who are your earliest like role models? Who when you first started playing, who'd you want to play like? Because I'm trying to think.
Yeah,
that must have been like in the late '80s, early '90s or so when you first started playing football.
yeah. So I was born 1984.
Oh,
So
okay.
I first started playing football when I was, I think, in third grade. So I was fairly young. I wasn't an ankle biter, a kid that started really young, at 6 or 7, like some of my friends did. I started a little bit older. But early influences, my dad, man, my dad was such a great influence. Like, he's a rare breed in today's world. He's a man's man, and growing up around that type of personality. My dad played at Division II school. He was the first person to graduate college from his family. And, my dad set records at the Division II level. At that time, like, getting a scholarship was a huge thing, like, to be able to have school paid for. And so he basically took the first offer he received. And so he played down at Catawba in North Carolina, in Salisbury. So I think when he finished school, like, he was a fullback, and he ended up finishing third, in all-time rushing. And my dad was, a little bit bigger than me. And, at that time, he was a little bit faster than me too. So he was, for that type of conference, that type of school, he was well suited. And, at that time, he probably could have played at a high level and done pretty well. But he was a great influence. Like, growing up, early on, like, I was around killers, like, I played with Mike Emo at Braddock Road. Chase Anastasio, who went on to Notre Dame. Like, we built like a really great group. Adam Fasnacht, which I think is, from a high school perspective, I think Adam Fasnacht is the most decorated high school athlete ever, right? Like, he won like 7 state championships across 3 different sports, wrestling, lacrosse, football. And I'll give you all the names of these people. Like, coming up, like, we Braddock Road, like, we would go to the Metro Bowl, like, and compete against all the other DC schools in youth ball, right? And so that was super competitive. And coming out of that system and then going into high school, it was like game on, right? Like, going into like freshman and then right into varsity. Like, I started at the varsity level as a sophomore. It really gave us a great foundation. And that's why Robinson and Braddock were so good at those times, is because they had those feeder programs for BRYC, and Coach Bendorf and all those coaches that came out of those areas. They did a really good job building those feeder programs around the fundamentals of football.
It's interesting. So when I played on a really, really good Braddock Road team, legendary actually, and we got great coaching, and so the players knew how to block, move your feet while you block, all those things that would do you well. And then you get to high school, and just anyone tries out for football, and there's kids that are big that little league football is kind of weight for age. So a lot of the guys that came in and started right away had no football training. So it was interesting how a lot of times when you go to high school, a lot of the kids that have been playing for many years don't get the opportunities because they're not as big. And that's the way it was, at least when I was in school. And it's I always tell people, we had a running back, this guy named Tommy Nicholson. Tommy ended up being the player of the year, soccer in the DC area, and ACC player of the year for UNC. He never played any high school football. And I ended up playing basketball because we didn't really grow. And all of the guys who blocked for us all became star high school running backs in different areas just because of the way it
Yeah.
works out. So Little League football has a strange relationship with high school football.
Yeah, it's huge, right? Like building those feeder programs is really important for the high school level, and it's also based off of demographics. It's where people are moving. At those times, think about like when I was born in '84. The government was really coming into the focus, right? People were taking jobs in the area, and then they were moving into more remote areas away from DC. So Robinson, you had Clifton, right? Clifton is like its own entity. I mean, going in there as a high school kid, like and not dying was just amazing. Because there's no police, like there's no police in Clifton area. Like you go back into those woods, it's like you're going into the abyss. And so like, going from West Springfield to Robinson was like completely different in every way, and it was amazing. But going to Robinson, it really prepped me for college. Like when I went to the 1AA level, like coming from Robinson and like what I experienced there, it was like, dude, this is nothing. Like I can dominate at this level right away, like right away. So the what you were stating with growing up like at the youth levels. So like Adam Fasnant, for example, right? Adam Fasnant was a one technique. He only weighed like maybe 220, 230, and he was all met. He absolutely dominated people. Like at the youth level, like Adam Fasnant was one of the most gifted athletes that I've ever seen. And he went on to play at UVA. He played lacrosse. But when it came to football, he was really undersized, but he had a strength and a technique that enabled him to absolutely dominate. And I came from West Springfield where Marshall Osbury, like he was really celebrated. He was a big kid. He was 300 something pounds. When I started, everyone was like, oh, this is going to be an NFL prospect. Marshall was the type of kid that he was too big to play in the youth leagues. So, high school was his first experience. But Adam Fasnant, growing up in the youth leagues, like Adam Fasnant would use Marshall because it was like he had all that experience. And, Chase Anastasio, who went on to Notre Dame, he started as an ankle biter. He came up from the very beginning. And, as you started to build those groups of kids, the bar started to elevate because then you had Mike Emo. And then it's like, whoa, like Mike's pushing it. So like, let's try to get on Mike's level. So it was like an imitation. Everybody was trying to elevate their own level. And, before you knew it, like you had a whole group of players that were primes, for high school, like and ready to dominate. And that really came from the BRYC program, Braddock Road. Springfield wasn't there, right? SYC wasn't there at the time that I was growing up. And, all the killers were at Braddock Road. So, yeah.
How would you describe the West Springfield? What was their football tradition by the time you were entering West Springfield? So when I played, West Springfield was amazing. They had this running back named Jack Brooks around 1980 or so, one of the best running backs I've ever seen. And I think they lost in the state final or won state one year, and then they kind of had some lean years. So they weren't known as a strong football program. I believe after a certain time. But how did you perceive the West Springfield tradition when you started there?
Yeah. So I knew the tradition with like Damone Boone, right? Damone Boone is probably the most notable player out of West Springfield. Matt Shannon, I knew pretty well. Matt Shannon played at the college level, quarterback in the 90s. So he was on the Damone Boone teams. So I respected those guys a lot. I went to some West Springfield games. I went to Robinson games. When I was at West Springfield, Bill Renner came in. So I think Crinetti was fired from West Springfield. Bill Renner came in as a new coach, and it was great. At West Springfield, they forced you to play freshman football. And so, I mean, there was no way I should have been playing freshman football, but that was the rules, right? So my freshman year, I played tailback, and then I played linebacker. And so, Tony Jenkins, who played at Syracuse, he was an All-American at Syracuse as a freshman. We were all on the same freshman team. So we just absolutely dominated people. Like we're talking about like, because there's different levels, and it wasn't fair to a lot of those kids. A lot of those kids were just starting, like playing football. And then you're like lining up against like Tony Jenkins, or, I mean, even myself, right? Like I had been around like a lot of great players, not to say I was the greatest player, but I'll hit you, And so it's just funny. Like at that time, it was memorable because like you would line up against people and it's like coming of age, right? And you see people in lines, right? And then they realize like who they're matched up against, and they start like slowly backing up, and trying to get somebody to replace them with where they're going. And so it's like I probably could have been pushed, more in that year. And obviously I moved over to varsity the next year and started. I probably could have started as a freshman or at least contributed on special teams at the high school level. But it was still fun. We still learned a lot. And, the core group of us that went on to go play college that started with that freshman team, it was memorable because we were doing a lot of things that we probably wouldn't be doing, at the varsity level. So it was fun, but it was definitely different, to answer your question. Bill Renner and that squad, they kind of led like with the militaristic type of focus, like very kind of rule oriented, rigid. And the funny thing is Coach Bendorf and Coach Renner both had military dads. But there was very key differences. With Coach Bendorf, he was always thinking of like in terms of the player, right? And trying to maximize their abilities. When I went to Robinson, Coach Bendorf set up like camp varsity. It was like this amazing thing. Like it was like a rite of passage. Like the players would go to this other location away from the high school, and you would stay like in like these little bunk rooms, and it was all outdoors, and it was like in a completely foreign place. And in high school, like just going like an hour, 2-3 hours away, like that's like going to a different country, And so that was really special because for him, he loved the outdoors, and it was something that was important to him. So he brought his players into that. And, all the little things he did, like, in the weight room, they had, all the iron. If you reached certain weightlifting pinnacles, like you had it was called the Iron Ram, I think. You had like your picture in the weight room, which is pretty cool. So all the people that reached that level and that status, like they had their photos. And like, just like the staff, like Francis, Bendorf, like his entire staff was really just focused on winning. Like they had a lot of former players that had succeeded, at all Met level. Everybody was there to win and to do it in the right ways, right? And with West Springfield, like what I kind of experienced was, it was very, very militaristic, follow this regime, like do this, do that. You can only play one way. You can't go both ways. Like that type of thing, and at the high school level, like, that might work when you're more specialized, maybe at an NFL level or something different. But at the high school level, like everybody needs to be playing both ways. Everybody needs to, if you got to put your best players on the field, and you have to win that way. And so just the environments were very different. It just, there's parts of Robinson that I actually miss. Even as an adult, like the home of the champions, at that phase, Paul Jansen was the AD, Coach Bendorf. Every sport absolutely killed it. Every sport, male, female, everybody was so tied into doing the best they possibly could in athletics. Like the parents were supportive. We had all these like events and things that celebrated that. And people really wanted to be the best they could, and athletics was valued at the school. If you were successful in the football team or successful in wrestling, or like other people really respected that. I mean, even if they weren't athletic, and that wasn't the primary focus, people were like, oh, like it was all respect, and, there's parts of that I miss because I think in today's world, you don't see that as much, right? Like it's all about competence, right? Like at Robinson, it was like, you want to be the best you could possibly be, and everybody's elevating your level, and you want to raise your level of competence, and you're going to be rewarded based upon that. And in real life, it's a little bit different. Like the world we live in now is a little bit different than that. And I'm just very thankful, like with everything Coach Bendorf built with the Robinson program and in that environment, I understand like all the little details that go into that, right? Putting together all the playbooks, like, developing camp varsity, having players go away to that. He took us to UVA, when we were seniors. Like we got to go to UVA as a team and see a game there as a part of that experience. And I mean, that takes time, right? Like that takes energy to do, but it really leaves a lasting impression on your players. And I think moving forward, I mean, it creates like an amazing legacy because like those players go on and they try to do the same things in their communities, and I look back at what Coach Bendorf did, and I was like, I was just like so thankful to be part of that program because, that's what enabled me to go to college. That's what enabled me to, have so much success, once I left Robinson. So.
Well, I was thinking that's an old school thing when they have even the best players play freshmen. When I was in school, everyone wanted to have a good freshman team. I think we had at least 3 Division I players on our freshman team, but they really wanted to have a good freshman team. They kept us together, and then you'd play varsity as a sophomore. That was kind of a relic from the old days. How did the game go when West Springfield played Robinson your junior year? And was it awkward when you came over and joined the Robinson team the next year?
No, like, so I grew up with a lot of the Robinson guys. And when I was a junior, I think I had like 19 tackles against Robinson at West Springfield, because I played against Mike, as a youth, and I respected Mike, but I didn't fear Mike, and I just want to win. And so I think Coach Bendorf like realized like, okay, well, this guy, he could provide some value, to Robinson. And like I said, I played football with, Adam Fasnod and Mike, and I knew all those guys, Chase, just through mutual acquaintances. And so I was pretty comfortable. And so then when I transferred over, I mean, it was kind of nice because I was the new guy, but I kind of came over in like a mysterious way. Like I got kicked out of school. So like in high school, I was like, oh man, like Dan, he's pretty interesting, So it was cool to be kind of a new guy in that environment. And they were very welcoming. Coach Bendorf was so welcoming through that whole experience. He supported me the whole way when, West Springfield didn't. Like they basically just said, hey Dan, like it is what it is. Sorry, and I remember that. And I think like those experiences really they dictate how you think about things. When I was in high school and that happened to me, I started to realize like if you play by all the rules, there's no guarantee, right? Like I was like I would say like I had a 3.7, 3.8 in high school at West Springfield. I never was in trouble, never had any issues. And then all of a sudden had this event happen in front of my house. I got into a fight in front of my own house for this kid that was just a mess. And the school came to conclusions, and then all of a sudden like I had all the chips stacked against me, right? And that was going from the school board, all these things, and nobody was going to help us except for us. Like my dad, we hired an attorney, we had to go through all this stuff, and these people that I thought were on my side, they weren't really there when it mattered, right? And when everything ended up working out because of all of my time, my dad put in, and my family and, friends, doing our due diligence. Coach Bendorf was supportive from the beginning, and Monday was the principal over there, was supportive. And, that really means something, I mean, that really means something. And those type of experiences are very, they shape you in a lot of ways. And for me, it's like, it's important to play by the rules, but at the same time, it's also important to do the right thing and to be honest and to stick with what you believe, because even if you quote unquote do the right things, sometimes people won't always see that as that, right? And so that was like a really transformative experience for me. And going into Robinson, which was like a dream, I mean, it was kind of serendipitous because like out of this really hard experience, I ended up being able to do all the things I wanted to. And so that really kind of set the tone of like, all right, how far can I push this, right? Like how far can I go into this gray area and be the best I can be at whatever I'm doing. So
Yeah, so when I went to Robinson, I started in 79 or 78, and the school was only six years old. So we didn't have a tradition, established tradition, but we had some great teams in basketball and football. Also, baseball was big back then. We were great at it. So all those players on those teams, their names were drilled into our heads because
Yeah.
the school hadn't been around for very long, but we knew Todd Kurtly, Mark Krasinski, Mike Tissall. We had so many great players. We'd won so many titles. By the time you got to Robinson, was it the school's tradition, or was it basically about Bendorf and what those teams had accomplished?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a lot of different people. Like I was lucky enough, like, so when Coach Bendorf retired, I put together this big legacy event to celebrate Coach Bendorf's career. And for me, it ended up being really rewarding for me. So it was weird, at that time, I don't know how far I want to go into this, but we wanted to celebrate Coach Bendorf, and everything he accomplished. And, I approached the school and was like, hey, like, let's do this big event. Like we could bring in all these people, to celebrate from past alumni, all these people that have been influenced. And, we could do it on campus. Like we do it then. And, at that time when I reached out, they were like, well, I don't know if that would be fair to the other teachers with, for other teachers that are retiring. And so they wouldn't do it on campus. So I was like, okay, well, then we'll just rent out like the Marriott and then we'll just do it our own way. And so I got to reach out to all the people that influenced like Coach Bendorf and the building of that tradition at Robinson. So, Coach Bendorf coached with Bruce Patrick over at Mount Vernon, and Mount Vernon had some really great teams like in the 80s. And Bruce Patrick was great, super great guy. I got to meet him and, meet a lot of the players that played on those state championship teams. And, you could see his coaching philosophy, mold into Coach Bendorf's, and then Coach Bendorf kind of molded it, around, his interests, right? It made it his own. And, that was just so rewarding, right? Because Bud Foster, so like we brought Bud Foster back, Ed Cunningham. We flew Ed Cunningham in from Los Angeles.
Like the Cardinals, right? Phoenix Cardinals, I think.
Yeah. He played for the Cardinals. He was a national champion at Washington. And he also did the documentary like Undefeated. He's done a lot of like really great things. Obviously he had a great football background, but after 5 years in the NFL, he actually went over to the film side and has done a lot of great films. He did King of Kong, Fistful of Dollars, about this guy that plays Donkey Kong, and he wants to become the world's best at Donkey Kong. And it's like stupid, but you're like, dude, you get so enthralled in the story because he's such a good storyteller. So Ed came in, he like served as like the MC for the event. We had different people from different parts of Coach Bendorf's career speak. And it was so great. It was so great to have everybody in one room. And, some people pass away, like, people get older, people pass away, things happen, and it was so great to be in that one space together with a lot of the core people that, had been there with Coach Bendorf throughout his career. Because, I mean, if you look at it, like Coach Bendorf, he won 135 games. I think his record was like 135-30 or something. So Chantilly, Robinson, a lot of his career was spent at Robinson, but man, that's a huge accomplishment. And, all the sacrifice, all the time that went into building, those high school programs without a ton of resources, which is, I'm very thankful for that. And like everyone in my life that have done things like that, I've always tried to thank them in my own way. Because, it's just amazing, the amount of influence that they've had. And you always want to thank people like that have done those type of things.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So, but how did your team do your senior year? So you transfer over, you only get one full year.
Yeah.
So how'd the team do?
We dominated. We were undefeated in the regular season, and it was tough. We got to the Northern Virginia championship game, so the finals, and we smoking Oakton, right? And so Coach Bendorf was playing his brother, so Pete, and we scored on the first play, but it was really weird. Like the weather completely changed, right? So it went from like bright and sunny, 70 degrees, to like pouring and like 30 degrees, like super muddy.
Wow.
So at that time, like Oakton was running like this option with Pat Day, and Pat Day was like, I mean, I'm 5'9". Pat Day was probably like 5'6". He was tiny, but he would hide behind the line, so you couldn't even see what was going on. And then nobody had good traction. And not to make excuses, but we were up like the whole game. And then I remember like I was in high school, you kind of just did, it's not like in college. Like in high school, you're just doing spot drops with pass, right? Like in college, like you're dropping off of, number 3 or number 2, exactly where you're going. Like in high school, you're in man or you're in zone, and you're just kind of like looking around a general area. It's completely different in college. But they set up I was on the outside, and they did a wheel route. So there should have been safety over top. So I was playing like weak side linebacker, and we came down right to the, like the last, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes of the game. They did a wheel route. And so we threw it up. So the inside receiver, went to the flat and then went up. And then he ended up catching a pass like inside the red zone. And so I was like trying to follow it, knowing, the down and distance, and knowing, what they had to cover. to cover the point spread. And yeah, they caught the ball. They ended up going in the end zone, and we ended up losing like 31-29. And it still bothered me. Like I played a lot of like fullback. I played, middle linebacker there with Blake Schubert, who went on to Villanova. I think I played more of like weak side linebacker when I was at Robinson. Blake played Mike or middle. But we had a great team. I mean, undefeated during the regular season, went into the finals, and then obviously just lost by those 2 points. But I think that team, like, I think it could have won a state championship just with the level of talent. And Coach Bendorf would probably say the same. Like, in regards to how stacked that team was, the year before they had won a state championship in 2001. In 2002, when I was a senior, we were unstoppable. But that was a tough year though too, because keep in mind, like 2001 World Trade Center, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then 2002 was the sniper. So there was part of the season where we were playing at Fort Belvoir because they were afraid with the games. And so it kind of like the overall feel of the season was strange because they canceled homecoming. It was just kind of like this. It was a weird season. It was a weird time,
Yeah.
and so we kind of came up during a unique part of of U.S. history.
Yeah. So when high school football is over, when did you decide you're going to go to Holy Cross?
Yeah, so I took some official visits. So out of high school, I was recruited by VMI, Citadel, Holy Cross, and then I had like some walk-on offers at different schools. Holy Cross was like the first school that really expressed interest, and I did an official there. I went up to Massachusetts, so Holy Cross is in Worcester, and Holy Cross, like, we play like Harvard, Yale. And then obviously the Patriot League, and then we play a lot of 1A opponents as well, like in non-conference games. And I just, like, when I went up there, I was like, oh, this is a new place. And out of high school, I just wanted to go somewhere different. And I was always kind of geared that way. Northern Virginia was a great place to grow up, but I didn't want to live there. Like, I didn't want to be there long term. It was great, like, growing up in youth ball and doing all that, but like, I didn't really want to work for the government. I didn't I didn't really want to do those things. I wanted to have a completely different experience. And so, going into Boston was like, at that time, I think I'd watched like, that movie with Matt Damon, like
Oh,
Boondock Saints,
Goodwill Hunting.
Good Will Hunting. So that was like my experience with Boston. It's like, oh, it must be like that, right? And so it was just like, it was magical. And then there was a kid that was at Holy Cross from Gonzaga. His name was Dave Dugan, and he was kind of like an All-American, just like a really cool kid. I wanted to be like him, and so when I saw him there, I was like, all right, I can do this. I can dominate this level, get a good education, go somewhere different, and then be in a good position, getting out of school, regardless of how things work out with my athletic career. I can go into different things. So made a decision to go there. I ended up starting right away. So I played in every single game in my college career. So all 45 games. I started off on special teams. So I just did all the things nobody wanted to do. So I was on the wedge on kickoff return. I was a wedge buster on kickoff. And then I slowly started getting the rotation, playing linebacker. But I had a really unique experience because, my head coach at Holy Cross, he was diagnosed with ALS after I was recruited, and they didn't know what it was for a long time. And he started to feel the effects. And then when I was done with my freshman year, he passed away.
Wow.
So it was like really quick onset. They didn't know what it was. And, before they knew it, before we knew it, he had passed away. And so I had a new coach my sophomore year with Coach Gilmore, and, it was bittersweet. Like, at first I didn't really like Tom Gilmore, but he was an absolute monster. Like, we're talking, I have so much respect for him now, and we have such a good relationship. It was tough, like, during that initial transition, because he had to kind of weed out the weak with Holy Cross. Like, the program was hurting. They had a coach that obviously had Lou Gehrig's disease, and there was a lot of things that weren't done right, and he did the best he could. So Gilmore came in, and Gilmore was an absolute stud in college. So this guy had 21 tackles as like a D1, like a one technique, a defensive tackle. He was Ivy League Player of the Year as a defensive tackle. He also was like 4.0 student, computer science major, went to UPenn, so Ivy League. and his brother played for the Miami Dolphins. He was his parents were fresh off the boat Irish, so they grew up in construction in Philly. So he was like the rare breed. So playing with that guy, I had so many unique experiences at Holy Cross. Like that was the head coach, the D coordinator. So I had a new position coach and a new D coordinator every single year I was at Holy Cross. But over time, like, so the people I got to meet during that time, so Ricky Ronnie, who is, where's he at now? He was at Penn State for a while. He was like an assistant at Holy Cross when I was there. And he's built a pretty good coaching program. But my defensive coordinator was a part of the play. So Cal versus Stanford, Richard Rogers. So he lateraled the ball twice on the play, like when the band comes on the field,
Okay. Yeah.
And so, so he was in that play, and he was an amazing athlete, like just a great guy, like that's probably one of the best plays in college sports. So he was one of the defensive coordinators when I was there. I played with a lot of great players. Like Ryan Fitzpatrick was at Harvard when I was a sophomore at Holy Cross. So I played against Ryan Fitzpatrick, played against Jim Harbaugh when he was at University of San Diego. He started his coaching career at San Diego. I just had like so many just amazing experiences, there. I mean, I played all 4 years. As a junior, I led the nation in unassisted tackles. I accomplished all the things I wanted to do. And so I was just so thankful to have had like those early experiences, at Robinson, that really just set the table for elevating the bar and just not accepting mediocrity at the next level.
As a linebacker at the 1AA level, is the game more complicated? Did it take more study, more film study than in high school, or could you just react and go get the ball carrier?
Yeah, it's all a thinking man's game. That's the only way that I was able to succeed at the 1AA level, was knowing where the ball was going to be at all times, right? So knowing where it was going to flow, whose responsibilities were what. As a middle linebacker, you're basically the quarterback of the defense. So you need to be able to, shift the defense around according to what formation you're in, whether it's, single wide or double wide. So like if you have, if all the receivers are like on one side of the formation, or if they're spread out across all sides, so you have to be able to set the fronts. And so if you know where you're supposed to fit, it gives you a huge advantage, because you know where the ball is going to go, and you know what's going to happen right before it happens. And so you can do a lot of things. And I learned a lot of that stuff there was a lot of great linebackers at Robinson when I was there. So Alex Marco Giannakis, that was at Virginia Tech. That guy was an absolute monster. Super undersized, played for Bud Foster, was a big contributor. Adam Brown, who ended up playing at Yale ahead of me, was a really great linebacker. Blake Schubert, that I played alongside with. There's all these little tricks where, when an offensive guard pulls, and there's all these little reads that you can make that puts yourself in a position to make a play every single time, right? And I just took that learning, how to read the, offensive line, how to gauge trajectory, just to be where the ball carries at. I mean, that's how I was able to amass the type of stats that I did in college. In college, I had, 317 tackles at the FCS level. And, if I wasn't making plays every single game, then I was upset about it, because there's no reason. And my sole focus in college was being the best possible football player. I mean, like academics, I did everything I needed to do. I was history and econ. That was kind of my focus, but football was the primary focus, and there were no outside focuses outside of that. So,
well, now I don't know all the rules, but players can transfer pretty easily these days. The transfer portal there's graduate students playing. Now you experience success pretty quickly at Holy Cross. Do you think in today's game you would have maybe want to try to level up? Or
yeah, this game is different, right? So this game is very different. So probably, right, because the dynamics now is around like Instagram and Twitter and all that, right? Like your own personal brand. It's tough, right? Because I had a lot of success as a freshman. So when that new coach came in and things got tough, it would have been easy to be like, hey, like I'm going to go to a new program where people are going to value me for me. But by sticking it out, that's where the actual reward was, because, I went from kind of like the whipping boy undersized, wasn't recruited by the new coach that came in, to being like the gem. And like I that's a great feeling, like when you can actually like change the way someone views you just through like hard work and putting in the time. You know, and I'm a kind of a confrontational person. Like I'm very direct, right? So, we had position coaches and defensive coordinators that were leaving every year. And my junior year, I led the nation under a coach that came from Utah State, and he was a great position coach, fundamentally. And, he left, and my coach was rare breed. So old school mentality, very direct. And a lot of people didn't like that. So they just kind of moved on. Right. And so I confronted my own coach on that. I was like, hey, you have to be able to retain some of your coaches. Like that's where you're going to succeed as a head coach. And I remember like we got into this like 3-hour argument, like blowout, and I don't know. Like when I look back on it, that's one of the things like I'm most proud of, is like a guy like that who would never like say like great job, but at the end of it, he was like, Dan Adams, like that kid, he's tough. And I respect that kid, and he would tell like stories and stuff. And like for that guy to tell stories, it would have been like, I don't know, like a Clint Eastwood type, or like an old UFC fighter, like that type of personality, like to sing you praises, like to me, like that's the greatest thing ever. So
What was your plan after college? Now, I know you played some international football, which you'll have to explain that because a lot of us aren't familiar with that. But I know you played for a pretty famous NFL coach. But
yeah,
what were you thinking about doing after college?
yeah. So it was kind of like my goal was to go to work, right? Like I was too small to play at the NFL level. I mean, once you get to that level, it becomes a meat market, right? Like I went to East Coast Bowl. I went to some different things with pro scouts following my end at Holy Cross, just to see where I would stack up. There were a lot of different, bowls at that time where small players could compete against each other, and you would basically have a showcase in front of different scouts. Just from a measurable perspective, like physical measurables, like I wasn't there to be able to translate to like a safety position, or something like that. So I knew that my time was limited, and so I wanted to make the most of it. So when the team I was a part of was actually like an amazing experience. It was actually subsidized by the NFL. And so what they did is they chose 45 college athletes from different divisions. What's funny is like I ended up playing with Kerry Wade at Virginia Tech. So Kerry Wade was at Robinson. I was actually at West Springfield when he was at Robinson. He was a year ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up reuniting as part of that team. And it was a mixture of like kids from Michigan, Virginia Tech, like, big 1A schools, 1AA schools, and then even some Division II schools, right? And so John Makovic was the head coach. George Darlington was the defensive coordinator. And like the whole idea was like, we're going to get these college athletes together and we're going to play in this international competition and be kind of like the ambassadors for the sport. So it was amazing because it was an all expense paid trip to have a training camp in San Francisco for 2 weeks. So I'd never been to California. So being able to go to California, like train at San Jose State University, my defensive coordinator was George Darlington, who was the DC at Nebraska. And you had all these just like amazing coaches and players that were really successful in their particular focuses. So we ended up, going to training camp for 2 weeks. Then we fly to Japan. And so we play in Japan. And Japan is like going to Mars, I mean, it was just like a completely different experience that I would have never had, had I not had that experience. And so we competed against like Germany, Japan, which is actually a pretty good team. And it was amazing. Like our quarterback was from University of Arizona. I obviously live in Arizona now in Tucson. So it's kind of funny, like looking back on that. And obviously we destroyed teams when we were there. But it was just like, it was an eye-opening experience. Like I read this book, it was by Ben Medrick. It was called, so Ben Medrick wrote that book on Facebook. So the movie that came up regarding,
Yeah.
so he wrote this book, when I went to Japan, all about, trading in Japan, on the Nikkei, and like these young people that made all this money, whether or not that story is true is irrelevant. But, you know, at that time I read that book, and then, you know, I went back to Boston and actually met Ben Mesrick when I was working in Boston. So this book I read in Japan, while I was in Japan, I actually went back to Boston and I met Ben because he trained at the same gym. And then Ben invited me to the Facebook movie, the Social Network premiere in Boston. And so I got to meet all these people, and like I got to meet like some really interesting people through football. And then obviously, like, you know, I competed on Pros versus Joes with.
Hey, how'd that opportunity come to be?
Yeah, so I had a buddy that was a producer, or was affiliated with the producers on the show, and so we had a group of guys from Holy Cross. So they were looking for college athletes just to compete against the best of the best from the NFL. So in that season, it was just football. So they wanted guys that could actually compete. So Michael Vick was on that season, Simeon Rice, Steve McNair, Priest Holmes, Rich Gannon, Pac-Man Jones, all those guys. So it was just like the who's who, right? So when I was out there, we went through this, like, you know, application process. I mean, it was the beginning of, I mean, it was towards the beginning of reality TV, right? So when we got there, interview, the whole thing was just, you're just gonna talk as much trash as you can, make it as entertaining as possible, and have fun, right? And so we ended up being on a show. We obviously got accepted. We got flown out to Los Angeles, and, you know, they put us in a hotel room, and it's like a few of our buddies, right? So we all had different shows, you know, that were staggered. And so, you know, the show I was on, we ended up competing against Pac-Man Jones and Priest Holmes and Rich Gannon, and, you know, the announcers were Michael Strahan and Jay Glazier. But it was crazy because, like, you know, Steve McNair was there. So he was actually there with his girlfriend that ended up killing him later on. So it was crazy. And Steve McNair was, like, you know, the nicest guy. And going to Los Angeles and, like, you know, seeing that experience, and, you know, just seeing the reality of, like, what reality TV was, like, that was just really eye-opening for me. Because obviously I got into a little skirmish with Pac-Man Jones, and, you know, they call that show The Fight, right? And the whole thing was like building that up, and really it was something small, but that was kind of the beginning of, like, social media and all those different types of things. And, like, you know, I was living in Boston, and when we filmed that show, like, Barstool Sports, like, picked it up, you know, and, like, Dave Portnoy, he's like a big name now, you know, among a lot of the younger people. So they did this whole thing in New England about, oh, you know, this masshole, like, you know, stood up to Pac-Man Jones. And you know, it was fun. It was a really kind of coming of age experience. Really thankful, you know, to be able to compete. You know, I mean, there are different levels, right? Like, so Pac-Man Jones, he has super long arms and legs, and he covers distance really quickly. Physically, he's very gifted, you know, and it's always interesting, right? Seeing how you stack up against the best of the best. Like, when I was in high school, I trained against, like, our training group. We had this thing called Game Speed, and we would train together all the time. And everybody had, like, their own little training groups, and we would all improve each other. So, like, Owen Schmidt was part of our group. So Owen Schmidt, you know, went on to WVU. So we were all no names. We were nothing. And we had this group, like Tony Jenkins, Owen Schmidt, Chase Anastasio, Blake Schubert, Mike Emo. And so we would all train together, right? And so, like, that's what we knew. That's all we knew. And, you know, Owen Schmidt, such a hard worker. Nobody knew who he was in high school. He, like, walks on to Division III program, you know, does really well there. And then he walks on to West Virginia. Yeah, complete walk on, you know. And he was an absolute killer at Fairfax. And nobody knew who he was because he played for a bad team, you know. And he was such a hard worker, such a good kid. And you know, the success that he had with, you know, like Pat White and Slayton, you know, him being that, like, that 1-2 punch as a white fullback, and him becoming, like, a cult hero at West Virginia. It was just amazing, man. You know, and like, the big thing, like, I'll say this too, like, you know, people started to teach me, like, Chase Anastasio. You have different people that come from different eras, right? And everybody has, like, you know, specific names that they know, but it's all the same universal things. Like, Chase Anastasio, like, at that time at Robinson, he was magic. Like, he was one of those guys, like, when something needed to be done, it was done, right? Like, when a big play needed to be made it, right? And you think about that, like, but how can that translate to your life? Like, is it, like, you know, is it something you visualize and then you just all of a sudden you create this amazing thing, you know? And obviously it's through hard work and sacrifice, all those different things, but, like, when it matters, like, you have the wherewithal, you know, to be focused and to be able to achieve and what you're trying to do, right, at the highest level. And like for me, man, it was like, a guy like Chase, like I want to be like that guy, so you imitate, people like that, and so the Mike Emos, the Damone Boones, the different people you've had on this podcast, like Grant Hill, like all these people, like they were the outliers that elevated everybody's game. I met, it was so funny, like Megan McCarthy, or I always forget her last name.
That's right, Megan McCarthy.
Megan McCarthy, I worked right next to her in the Prudential Center. I didn't even know who she was.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, dude, I had no idea that you had like 12 state championships or whatever she had. Like it was 16. Absolutely ridiculous. Dude, I saw her every single day. And her husband used to always be like, my wife is something pretty special from Robinson. Dude, I thought she like had like maybe 1 or 2 state championships. I had no idea. She had 16 state championships, doing a national championship in college. So I was always just thinking, like, whenever I was with her, I was just like, oh, that's nice, but I never knew. And like her office was right there. And we would talk about Robinson a lot, but I didn't know that she was that dominant and that successful. And it's so crazy because like there's so many things in my life that are like that. Like, you remember the ice bucket challenge, like Pete Frady's? So Pete Frady, his office was right next to mine at Sun Life when I worked there. And so I would go into his office, and at that time, he didn't have any issues, right? He hadn't developed Lou Gehrig's or anything, and he had these bats. And I would go into his office, and I would pick up these bats, and we would talk about life. It'd be like, oh man, dude, you got to go out and do this. It's going to go by quick. And we were only like 23, 24, 25. We were young. And I was always telling Pete, I was like, Pete, you got to go out and do these things, man. You never know. Like, you never know. And then all of a sudden, like, he started developing, you go to these workouts in the morning, and he started developing like these things where he couldn't balance himself right. And then he ended up, losing a lot of his physical abilities. And then obviously we know the rest of the story with, Lou Gehrig's disease. But he was an absolute stud at Boston College. And so, yeah, it's just like, these chance encounters with all these people. It's just, it's crazy, and with Coach Bendorf, like doing the whole legacy event, like the retirement event, like meeting all those people. So not only like the people that I was around, in my own class, but like all these other people, and then just seeing what they had built with their life, like outside of football, because, sports themselves are great. But to me, it's like, how can you translate that into every aspect of your life? And that to me is the next level. Like, because Chase Anastasio, he went on, he was ATF for a while, and now, he's with all these different types of operations. Like, that's what he likes to do, and so he is the best at that, right? Blake is in the FBI, Blake Schubert, he always wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps. So, football gave those guys the foundation to endure like the difficult things that nobody wanted to do, to be able to get to the levels that nobody wanted to be at. And like, those are the guys that I love, man. And I mean, I think back on that as an adult at 38, and man, like, I still think about high school. Like, I know that's weird, and I've done a lot of things post high school that I'm very proud of. Like, I love my family. Like, I built these amazing things, but the world is different now. It's not this clear cut thing. Like, if you put in the work, there's a lot of different political things that go into things that aren't what they used to be. Right. And, navigating that, like, I'm very thankful to hopefully be that Coach Bendorf, right, where I can help influence the next generation with little things that we've learned. And that's what we're doing now. But, I would be lying if I told you, like, there's definitely things I miss, but I think that's the reality of things. There's always going to be nostalgia around things. There's always things that, you glorify, the glory days. But yeah, it always changes, which is a good thing, and keeps it fun.
Well, also tell us about the, I guess from the ESPY Awards came this expedition to Everest of I guess it was a disabled vet that you help get to the top of Everest. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of unique things, right? Like, whenever I've kind of learned, like, whenever I want to do something, I just do it, right? So when I worked at Sun Life, I did 4 years there, and I was selling, life insurance and disability and all those type of things. And I just kind of got tired of that. Right. And so I saw this kid, like, with this kind of amazing story. Like, he wrestled without, like, partially formed arms and legs. Mm-hmm. So he competed in things, and his parents saw, like, no limitation. And, these are in the early days. Like, it's before all the stuff now where everybody has, like, an Instagram handle. Everybody has like a way that they're trying to promote whatever they're doing, with whatever whatever it is. But back then I thought it was genuine, right? Like this kid, he's playing football, he's doing these different things. Man, like that's awesome, and it's like, well, the things that we learned, like playing football, we were fully able-bodied. Like I had a lot of physical gifts, like Chase had physical gifts. Like we elevated those physical gifts, but we had some good foundations to start with. My dad played college football, you know, different people came from different lineages, right? So, with Kyle, I was like, oh man, like this guy can accomplish all these things. And so I basically, like, I don't know, on a whim, I flew down to Atlanta. I was like, hey, I know you try to compete in this like MMA fight, dude. Like, no, man, like you got to do something that you can control, right? That's in your control, that you don't have to focus on all these external factors. Dude, we can build an adaptive climbing system for you that'll take friction off your arms and legs. We can figure it out together, and you can basically bear crawl up Kilimanjaro. So I was like, dude, like it'll be awesome. It'll be awesome to do that. So I pitched him on the idea. And, granted, like at that time, right, like I was a little bit idealistic because I had like back to back, like all these really unique experiences. I got out of school. I had gone to Japan right out of school. I had gone to Boston, met all these like crazy people. I'd gone to like Los Angeles, like with Pros versus Joes. I had like a lot of unique experiences. And so at that time, I was like, oh man, like that would be really cool. So, we funded the whole project. I'd never been out to the West. I always wanted to live in the West. So we went out, we met this guy that had summited Everest and he was blind. And he had like this team of people that they built all these things around people with disabilities, And so I was like, oh man, like it'd be great like to connect with these guys. And so we ended up building this adaptive climbing system over like 6 months. We tested it out in different locations. And so we ended up bringing two veterans that were injured in active duty with us, and then we also took the remains of another veteran that passed. And so we took a small film crew. We went over to Africa. We funded everything on our own. We basically, so Kyle bear crawled up Kilimanjaro without any assistance. We didn't help him in any way. And we basically put the strategy together. I actually came out to Arizona because one of our guides was here in Arizona, so got familiar with this area. And it checked all the boxes because I always wanted to be in the American West. I always wanted to hike and climb and be outdoors. And so I was like, all right, well, get involved with this, help this kid and meet all the people and have fun, And so we ended up doing it. The project ended up winning an ESPY, so it got a lot of like attention from the media. And so we went to Los Angeles, like we went to the ESPYs. We ended up selling, that the footage that we captured, we sold it to ESPN. And so there was proceeds that we were able to obtain to cover our costs. But for me, like I was kind of stuck, right? I was in an industry I didn't really want to be a part of. And so I used that to leapfrog into IMG, WME. So William Morrison Exemplar, IMG with like all the sports properties. Mm-hmm. So like IMG Academy. So I got into marketing. So I worked as basically like an account rep at IMG in Atlanta, IMG Live in Atlanta. And so that's what enabled all that to happen. And so then it just like slowly started building. And the crazy thing is like through those relationships, like that's how I came to Arizona. Because like when I was a kid, I like Carrie Strug was an Olympic gold medalist. Mm-hmm. And like when I was 12, I was like, oh man, like that's the coolest thing ever, because I was like right just coming of age. And I always like it always stuck in my head. And I ended up when I was at IMG, like I ended up starting to understand like how you could hire out sports properties. And so I actually hired at Carrie Strug to do like a public speaking event, like to commemorate the Olympics. And then I came to Tucson because we actually stayed at Carrie's house. And so like that's how I came here. Is I came to this area. We bought a house here in 2018, but it was because we came to Carrie's house and we were like, oh, this area is awesome. And that's how we ended up here.
Wow. Well, Dan, you've done a lot with your career. You've accomplished so much in such a short period of time, and you had a lot of fun. You've done lots of good deeds. Where does football fit into the things you want to accomplish? I know that you've done some coaching. I saw some profile online.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into coaching? Is that something that's in your future?
Yeah, I think the sport is just different now, right? Like I think the sport is different. I think that time is passing with football, as sad as that is. it's just the way that I was taught and the fundamentals and what I believe. uh you can't play that way anymore, and so I think it'd be more frustrating for me than beneficial. I mean, I've definitely helped a lot with sports and different things, and what I try to do is just anything I'm interested in, I just try to build it, right? Like in reality, like we built a place here. I mean, I'll show you, like, our house, like we live in the mountains in the middle of the desert, so it's like we live in this really like special.
Wow, that's cool.
So
I see a coyote. I see a coyote out there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's just, we, whatever we have an interest in, we just go after. And my wife is like that too, and so, right now I serve, I'm in the electrical vehicle charging space, right? Because it's a new technology for me. Like, I'm always interested in emerging technologies and how, they influence the future. In the past, you had like the railroad and you had all these changes. And I just got interested in, like, how the customer experience would be changed, through EV, whether it's, there's all this money being thrown into it. I know people have different perspectives. My perspective changes, daily. But I like having the ability to have an impact in, the way the future generations see things, right? So it's been kind of fun, getting involved in these different things and trying to build like tangible outcomes, right? Because I think that's one thing that's missing in a lot of people's lives is they go through and like they're in charge of one part of a widget, but they don't actually see the tangible outcome of their labor, right? And I always wanted to like have tangible results. I mean, I think that's one thing from sports, like you have stats or you have like how productive you are, or they grade you out. And I'm one of those people that operate like that. I like having tangible metrics to showcase like improvement, right? So so yeah, so it's been great. Two kids here in Arizona. My wife is a former Federal Service Academy grad, so she's a psychologist, so I have my hands full with her. She keeps me in check. um like I try to just build everything that is important to me, that I want my kids to experience. I think it's like the opposite, right? Like I grew up in Northern Virginia, so I wanted to experience the opposite of that, right? I wanted to be in the American West, and to have my kids experience that. I mean, they're probably going to want to live in New York City, after this experience out here. So it all kind of swings back and forth. But yeah, it's just, football is, dude, if I didn't have football, I don't even know what I would do, right? Because like at that time, like Boy Scouts was out, right? Like these things that men can do, right? Like a rite of passage, I think is really important. I think it's really important in the development of men. And Walter Camp recognized that, in the 1890s. And so a lot of people want to bash football, right, for the dangers of the sport, concussions, these different things. But what people don't think about is what are the impacts when you don't have a sport like football, for young men to go out and compete and play against each other and, get that energy out. Like what are those ramifications? So there's just a lot of things like to weigh. And with everything that's set up right now with the transfer portal, no sense of accountability. There's no sense of accountability. And so what happens is the culture as a whole, you have no sense of accountability. So when things get tough, you just shift to something else, right? And that's where you do all the work, right? That's where all the magic happens, is in the difficulty. And if you grow up thinking that like, Instagram and like your followers and like that's so important, that's going to dictate your life, like you're going to live a really difficult life.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to remember, and I know there's different things to factor in. There's money that's factored into things, especially at people at that top 1%. I don't necessarily think paying college athletes is a horrible idea, especially for like the Reggie Bushes and the people that are at that super high level. But you have to think in terms of everyone else, of like, when you try to insulate the sport, like what are you teaching people, right? Like what are you teaching young people? And that's the biggest thing. That's why football was created. So when you start kind of going against that and not really seeing the big picture, I think that gets a little bit dangerous. And that's where understanding history is really important, right? Of like all these different programs, like, what is a successful high school program? Like what are those universal things that each successful high school program has? How do they build a culture? All those things are important, like even in a workplace, right? Like, how do you build successful workplace culture? It's a lot of the same things. I mean, obviously it's different in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of similarities in just day-to-day life. So
Yeah.
um
Well,
yeah.
well, Dan, last question, and I'll let you go and enjoy your birthday. If you had to give a young Dan Adams a piece of advice, what would that advice be? Another way to ask the question, which I don't like, is asking, "Do you have any regrets?" So I'd rather be more positive. And what advice would you give to a young Dan Adams?
Yeah. So that's a hard one. I mean, I just, just follow your gut with things, I mean, don't worry about what people think, just stick to what you believe and just go after it completely. And I'm very thankful. Like I've really, to be honest, I've really accomplished everything I've wanted to accomplish. Everything I've wanted to do, I've done it, you know, I know I mentioned that Oakton play. I would have loved to win a state championship at Robinson, and give that to Coach Bendorf, back to back. But everything I wanted to do, like I've done it, and what I've kind of found in my life, if something's not working out for me, like there's usually a reason why. Like usually I don't really want it, right? And so I think the difficulty I deal with now is like I get really focused, right? Like when I want something, I just go after it like completely. But now I have two kids and I have family. So it's like I have to learn to prioritize things a little bit better, because like with football, it's like you're just gonna go after it, whatever it takes. You're gonna make necessary sacrifices, done. But when you have family, there's other things involved, right? And you have to prioritize different things. And I think that's one of the biggest things that athletes struggle with, is like they've been focused on themselves for so long that they sometimes forget like the people around them, right? And I think the most successful athletes that are able to transition into other parts of their life, they're able to see the bigger picture, right? Beyond themselves. And they're able to channel that in ways that other people can understand and get it done. So, I know that I answered your question in a roundabout way. I don't really have any specific regrets. I would say, in regards to what I would tell myself, it's just follow your gut. Don't worry about how it looks currently. It's gonna factor out. It always has. And and shoot big, man. Go as big as you can. If I had gone back, I probably would have just I probably would have been try to be like a Rudy Rudiger, just like walk on some school, play special teams, maybe go to like I don't know, like a lower tier 1A program, see if I could compete. But I don't know. I mean, I ended up doing that in a roundabout way through, USA football and Pros versus Joe. So ended up working out. But yeah, I can't thank you enough like for having me on. Like I can't thank you enough for sharing these stories, and bringing back, all these people, and, allowing us like to listen to different people's perspectives. I followed Mike and Sean Glennon, I play with Sean,
Oh yeah.
like all these people you've been interviewing, like, Chris Warren was always like this myth, right? Like, who is that guy? Like all these people, like they're like myth, so to see them in the flesh and see how they built their life and what they're doing now and how they've implemented the lessons has been great. And my relationship with like Coach Bendorf and those guys, like those are some of the strongest relationships. I talk to those guys, I know from high school. I still stay in contact with those guys. I still talk to them on a regular basis. So it's crazy. And I live in Arizona, and a lot of my friends live all around the country. We don't even live in Northern Virginia anymore. But we talk back on those days, and we really value, the opportunities we were given. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for the kind words. It's also good for my own development to talk to so many successful people like yourself. I enjoyed the stories. You mentioned Bendorf. He's a guy I didn't know. I always associated Robinson football with Ed Henry and Nick Hilgert, and then
yep.
I got a chance to meet Mark through this, so it's been great.
I'm
But
gonna give you a list of the great. Like I'm gonna give you a list. I'm gonna
yeah,
give
you
you
should, because I don't
Owen
know the
Schmidt.
I don't know the young players so well.
Uh,
I know the old players.
yeah, I'll give you Owen Schmidt. We get Mike Emo. We can get a lot of the people
I
from.
would love to talk. Owen Schmidt. So after West Virginia lost, they had the heartbreaking loss to Pittsburgh. They played Oklahoma, and I guess the Cotton Bowl. I forgot what it was, and they crushed Oklahoma. But it was a heartbreaking season, because they blew the number one ranking against their bitter rival Pitt. And Owen Schmidt was interviewed after the Oklahoma game, and it was his last game. And I'll never forget this because I didn't even know he was from Fairfax. But he started crying. And he's like, man, when I think about this state, West Virginia, and these people, what this program means to them and what they mean to me. And, almost made me cry. That was such a great interview. I would love to talk to Owen Schmidt. If you can set that up, I would be eternally grateful.
I'll set that up. I'll give you a list of people, and you can kind of decide who you want to bring on. The funny thing about Owen Schmidt is, like, when we were training, Owen was always like, he would always like downplay himself. He'd always be like, man, like, I should have been better. I should have been better. Dude, this kid, we would tell him, dude, you're going to kill it, dude. Like, you're going to absolutely kill it. Like, just stick with it, Like, Owen had never really lifted weights, like, in high school. He had just started, like, when he came to our group, and like the instrumental gains, like, that's where genetics, like, plays a different role, right? Like, Tony Jenkins at Syracuse, like, he had never lifted weights before, and then all of a sudden he's just like throwing up like 500 pounds. Like, Owen Schmidt is the same. He didn't have any experience, right? And so then he gets involved in our group. He kind of sees, like, oh, like, this is what it can be. He elevates his level, to a whole different level, right? But it's just awesome because he's such a genuine person. The reason he resonated so much with WVU is because he's so genuine and he's a good person. He really looks out for other people. He's not arrogant. He really just wants to compete, and there's not too many people like that, right? That can succeed at that level and also remain genuine. Like, he ran like a bar outside of WVU. So he bought a bar when he was done. And it's just great. But I know
he played in the NFL for a couple of years, right?
Yeah. He played for Seattle. He played for the Raiders for a few years. He had that famous incident where he bashed his helmet against his head and started bleeding before the game started. But that was Owen, man. Like, he was just such a good kid, hard nosed, like, really good working kid, and he came from a single parent household. Like, his dad wasn't around, like, and his mom raised him, and it was him and his brother. So, like, him and his brother would always come out, and like, he didn't have like the influences that I did with, like, a dad, and he, he got involved in, like, in our environment, even though he wasn't a great high school program, but he saw that, and then it was like, boom, and it was like a whole different level, and like those Netflix series that they do, I forget like on Monte Teo and all those things, like like the switch, like with seeing things, like, I don't know, man. I love that type of stuff. I love hearing the stories, and I'm really thankful for you. And I know you're a lawyer. You've had a really successful career. You went to UVA, which is an amazing school. My brother went to UVA.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And that's the best of the best, dude. Like, when you went to UVA back in the day, it was like, dude, that was the creme de la creme. If you got to UVA, you were doing big things out of high school.
Well, yeah. I always think in life, wherever you are, you just make the most of it. So if you're at UVA, if you're at Holy Cross, if you're at West Virginia, just wherever you are, you make the most of it. Good things will happen.
Absolutely. But, I always remember, though, because, like, UVA, it was so tough to go in there, and you had to put in the work, right? And, like, it wasn't guaranteed. My brother didn't get in right away, and, he put in the work and ended up getting in and graduating, but I don't know, like, you need to shoot for something, like, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're, end up going to WVU, you want to be the best. Owen Schmidt. Whatever you're doing,
just make the most of wherever you are.
Absolute best, crush it, and that's what it's all about. It's just a game. It's fun.
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, Dan, I enjoyed this, man. And look, I would love to talk to Owen and whoever else you recommend. And next time you're in town, let me know. We'll go grab a beer or a coffee, whatever.
Yeah, man. Yeah, definitely. And if you ever head out west, be happy to host you out here in Arizona. If you guys ever, try to escape the winters. But yeah, I'll put a list together. Yeah, it'll be great. I think you'll appreciate, some of the younger people.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no access to the young folks. I'd love to talk to them. I only know the old folks. So,
well, they're both great. They're both great.
Exactly.
But I think, like, I'm right at the cusp, right? So, like, we're right between the millennials and then your generation. So we're kind of like the in between. So maybe you get more comfortable with that. Maybe you get more comfortable with, like, the millennials, and you can get that perspective too.
The biggest difference is when you talk about your counterparts and colleagues like Chase and Emo, I know of them. I actually coach Mike in basketball, but I know of them, but I don't know them that well. When I talk to older guys, I saw them play. So for me, it's a little bit, it's different because it's easier to speak to that. When I talk to younger guys, I have to do my research because I wasn't there. I didn't see the game. So I got to actually, I got to know what I'm talking about. So
Yeah. I would say like, Mike Emo, I mean, he was probably the creme de la creme,
oh,
out of Northern Virginia, at that time, and so like he can give you some unique experiences into, Virginia Tech, like post Michael Vick, he's falling like right there, so he was at the very beginning of that program.
also in the CFL. CFL is interesting too.
Yeah, CFL. I mean, obviously he was good friends with Marcus Vick, like Michael Vick's brother,
Mm.
Bud Foster, and and it's amazing like what those guys built, like yeah, it's just all of it's amazing. Virginia is such a hotbed, like you think about the coastal regions and
Yeah.
Allen Iverson and all those guys, that came out of those programs. Like, man, like what a special time, to grow up in Virginia, to be part of Northern Virginia. And it's something like, I'll never forget. And I'm so thankful to people like yourself. I'm thankful to, Coach Bendorf, that whole Northern Virginia area that built, this generation of young people. And my brother still works at West Springfield, so it's like,
Oh, is that right? Oh,
well,
that's cool.
yeah,
What's his first name?
his name is Brad. His name is Brad.
Hmm.
Yeah, so he's still at West Springfield, and so man, like, it's been, I graduated in 2003, so almost 20 years, since I graduated high school.
Mm.
And it always feels like yesterday, it just feels like it doesn't really feel like you age. It's like you're in a time warp,
Yeah. It stays with you. I
Yeah.
think about my high school days all the time. So,
Yeah. Well, you look great. You've taken really good
thanks, you
care of
too.
yourself, Julian.
Yeah, and you have a lookalike. I did a interview with a guy named Tommy Park. He runs a huge soccer program. He's a very successful in the sports management business. I'll send you that link. You guys are like lookalikes. I think you're about the same age too.
Nice,
So,
nice. Yeah, I'll connect. I've watched a lot of your podcasts, so I'm always catching up on new ones, man. So yeah, thanks for all you can do. I'll send you some new contacts, anything I can do to help you. I'll be sure to do it. And yeah, maybe we should do like, an event one day, like Nova Legends,
well, we can do that, but also if you like, we can get some of your teammates and do a call with a bunch of you guys together. You can talk. You can tell the old stories. It can be some West Springfield guys and Robinson, or you can go all Robinson. We can have Bendorf loves telling stories, so he'll join us for that.
Yeah. I mean, I have a whole list of like, I mean, you can get told a lot of unique perspectives, right? Like the guys I play with, like a lot of 1A guys. I mean, you can get Damone Boone. I mean, you get a lot of people, so we can get you those guys. I can find them.
That'd be great, man. Yeah, I could diversify, get some young folks, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, thank you, Julian.
Yeah, have a good rest of your birthday, and thanks again for taking time.
Absolutely, dude. It's a pleasure, man. To be able to celebrate my birthday like this is great.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say.
It's an honor, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Dan, have a good one, buddy.